Doesn't rattle. In 30 years of journalism, from local news to NBC to her own Emmy-nominated talk show, she's interviewed murderers, abuse survivors, politicians caught in lies, and celebrities in full meltdown. Her producers joke that she could interview a brick wall and somehow make it seem sympathetic. But Prince Harry wasn't a brick wall. He was something worse. A guest who'd decided before sitting down that every question was an ambush. His father was in America that very week, meeting with President Trump, addressing Congress, attending state dinners, and Harry was 20 minutes away in Montecito, uninvited. Tamron asked about that. She asked gently, with genuine curiosity about how it felt. What happened over the next 18 minutes would test every ounce of patience Tamron Hall had developed over 3 decades. And when she finally asked the simplest possible question, "How's Meghan doing?" his response made her do something she'd never done in the history of her show. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you hit subscribe and smash that like button. Now let's get into what really happened on the Tamron Hall show. The Tamron Hall show studio had that distinctive morning energy. Bright lights, enthusiastic audience, the kind of warmth that made even reluctant guests eventually open up. That was Tamron's specialty, creating a space safe enough for real conversation. Her producers had seen it work hundreds of times. Defensive celebrities would arrive with their guards up and leave having shared more than they'd planned. They expected the same today. They settled into their positions. The audience applauded as the cameras began rolling. "Harry, welcome. It's genuinely good to have you here." "Thank you." No elaboration. No warmth, just 2 words dropped like stones. "So I want to start with something that's happening literally right now. Your father is in America this week, meeting with President Trump, addressing Congress. There's no scheduled meeting between the 2 of you. How does that feel?" Harry's jaw tightened visibly. "I'm not going to discuss private family matters on television. But it's not entirely private, is it? The absence of a meeting is public knowledge. People are asking questions. I'm giving you the opportunity to address them. By asking the same questions everyone else asks? That's not opportunity. That's repetition." Tamron absorbed the dismissiveness without flinching. She'd dealt with worse. "Fair point. Let me rephrase. Your father is in your country 20 minutes from your home, and the schedule doesn't include you. That's unusual for any family. What's your perspective on that?" "My perspective is that state visits have state priorities. This isn't about me. But you've said publicly that you want reconciliation. That you'd love to spend more time with your father. This seems like a missed chance." "Missed chances are a matter of interpretation." "Whose interpretation? Yours? His? The palace's?" Harry's eyes sharpened. "You're fishing for a headline. I'm asking a question. That's literally what this is. A conversation where I ask questions and you answer them. If the answers are headline-worthy, that's not my doing." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Tamron felt the energy in the room changing, the realization that this wasn't going to be the warm, sympathetic interview they'd expected. "Let's talk about Ukraine," she said, pivoting. "You were just there. You gave a speech at the Kyiv Security Conference. You called for American leadership. President Trump responded by saying you don't speak for the UK and asking how's his wife. How did that land?" Harry's face flickered with something between anger and resignation. The president's response was characteristic. Characteristic how? Of a certain approach to discourse. Dismissive, personal, deflecting from substance. Some would say your speech itself was a kind of deflection, inserting yourself into complex geopolitical issues where you have no formal role. I have the role of someone who served in Afghanistan, someone who works with wounded veterans daily, someone who understands what war costs. Those are credentials, not a mandate. What gives you the authority to address American foreign policy? What gives anyone authority? Expertise? Experience? Moral clarity? Those are things you claim. Others might question whether you have them." Harry leaned forward. "Others question everything I do. That's been established. The question is whether the questioning is substantive or reflexive." Tamron matched his posture. "I'm asking substantively. You inserted yourself into a sensitive diplomatic moment. Your father's state visit. Tense U.S.-Ukraine relations, an ongoing war, and made statements that Trump immediately dismissed. Was that strategic or impulsive?" "It was principled." "Principled according to whom?" "According to anyone who believes that international commitments should be honored, that the Budapest Memorandum means something, that, according to you then, your principles, which you've decided should override the actual diplomatic process." Harry's voice rose slightly. "I'm not overriding anything. I'm adding a voice. A voice that, according to the president, doesn't represent anything but itself." "Let's shift to something else," Tamron said. The Netflix situation. Your deal was reportedly downgraded from a major production agreement to a first-look arrangement. Your wife's as-ever-brand partnership with Netflix ended recently. Season 3 of her show isn't happening. What's going on? Harry's expression hardened. Business arrangements evolve. That's the PR answer. What's the real answer? The real answer is that entertainment partnerships are complex and not everything works out as initially planned. But you're framing it as mutual evolution. The reporting suggests Netflix pulled back. There's a difference. Reporting by whom? The same outlets that misrepresent everything else about our lives? Business reporting, from outlets that cover deals and ratings, not tabloids. All outlets have agendas. That's a convenient way to dismiss anything you don't like. If everything critical is biased, then criticism itself becomes impossible. Harry's jaw worked silently for a moment. I'm not dismissing legitimate criticism. Then address it. Your Netflix output has been limited compared to the deal size. Some projects were canceled. Viewership apparently declined. Those aren't accusations, they're observations. What happened? What happened is that we're building something meaningful rather than churning out content for content's sake. That sounds noble, but Netflix presumably wanted content. They signed a deal expecting output. If the output hasn't materialized, that's a problem regardless of how meaningful your intentions are. Quality takes time. Time that Netflix apparently ran out of patience for. The audience had gone very quiet. Tamron could feel them processing what they were witnessing. Not the sympathetic prince they'd expected, but someone who treated every question like an attack. Let me ask about the visa situation, Tamron continued. The Heritage Foundation has been trying to access your immigration records. They argue that your admitted drug use should have been disclosed and could affect your eligibility. The case has dragged on for years now. What's your response to people who say you received special treatment? Harry's face went cold. I'm not going to dignify a politically motivated lawsuit with commentary. It's not just the lawsuit, though. You admitted in your memoir to using cocaine, marijuana, and psychedelic mushrooms. Those admissions raise legitimate questions about visa eligibility. That's not politics. That's immigration law. My immigration status is a private matter between me and the relevant authorities. You made your drug use public in your book. You sold that information for profit. How is it now private? The book was about my journey, my healing, not about providing ammunition for political opponents. But you did provide ammunition. By publishing those admissions, you created questions that now follow you. That's a consequence of your choice, not a conspiracy. Harry stood up slightly, then sat back down. This is exactly what happens. I try to be honest about my struggles, and that honesty gets weaponized. Weaponized by whom? You wrote the book, you described the drug use. People are simply asking whether the same rules applied to you as to everyone else. If someone without your profile admitted to cocaine use, would their visa be scrutinized? I can't speak to hypotheticals. Then speak to specifics. Did you disclose your drug history on your visa application? That's between me and Immigration Services. So you won't answer. I won't participate in a fishing expedition. Tamron let the non-answer sit for a moment. You know what's interesting? You've demanded transparency from your family. You've criticized the palace for hiding things, for not being honest with the public. But when the same standard is applied to you, suddenly transparency becomes a fishing expedition. Let's talk about staff, Tamron said. Your chief communications officer left after less than a year. Your executive director at Archewell left. 3 other communications staffers resigned earlier. That's a lot of turnover. People pursue different opportunities. That's normal. Not at this rate. Losing 5 senior communications people in under a year suggests something beyond normal career movement. Suggests to whom? To anyone who's ever managed an organization. High turnover usually indicates management problems, unrealistic expectations, or a difficult work environment. Or it indicates that high-profile positions attract ambitious people who use them as stepping stones. That's one interpretation. Another is that working for you is harder than people anticipated. Harry's voice dropped dangerously. You're repeating tabloid narratives. I'm repeating business analysis. HR professionals have commented on these departures. They're unusual. Instead of explaining why, you're dismissing the observation as tabloid gossip, because it originates from tabloid gossip. No, it originates from public announcements of departures. The pattern is observable fact. The interpretation might vary, but the departures themselves happened. Why did they leave? For various personal and professional reasons, which you won't specify, which aren't mine to share publicly. How convenient. Every question that might require an uncomfortable answer becomes a privacy concern. But your book invaded your family's privacy extensively. The boundaries seem to shift depending on who benefits. Harry's hands had balled into fists on his lap. The audience could see his struggle to maintain composure. "How's Meghan?" The question came softly, Tamron's tone shifting to something gentler, but Harry's response was anything but soft. "I'm not discussing my wife." "At all?" "At all. That's going to be difficult given that everything you've built is jointly branded. Harry and Meghan is the identity. The foundation is joint. The Netflix deal was joint. She's half of the public persona. She's my wife, not a topic. She's also a public figure who's made extensive public statements. I'm not asking about your private life. I'm asking how she's handling things. A question any friend might ask. You're not a friend. You're a journalist. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I can ask a human question without ulterior motive. In my experience, there's always an ulterior motive. That's a sad way to view every interaction. Some people genuinely care about the answer. Harry's eyes met hers directly. Do you? Or do you care about the clip this creates? I care about understanding you. I've given you every opportunity to share your perspective, your work, your vision. You've treated each opportunity as an attack. At some point, the problem isn't the questions. The problem is always the questions when they're designed to provoke. They're not designed to provoke. They're designed to understand. I asked about your father. You deflected. I asked about Ukraine. You lectured. I asked about Netflix. You blamed bias. I asked about your visa. You cited privacy. I asked about staff. You said it was tabloid gossip. I asked about Meghan. You refused entirely. At what point in this conversation have you actually engaged rather than evaded? The question hung in the air. Harry seemed genuinely caught off guard by its directness. I've engaged with everything. You've deflected from everything. There's a difference. Engagement means actually addressing the substance. You've addressed nothing. You've just explained why each question is unfair to ask. Because they are unfair. Are they? I asked how it feels that your father didn't schedule time with you. That's not unfair. That's human. I asked about your Ukraine speech and the president's response. That's not unfair. That's current events. I asked about Netflix. That's not unfair. That's your career. Every question has been reasonable. Every answer has been defensive. Harry's voice rose. Because I've learned that nothing I say is treated fairly. By whom? I'm sitting right here. I've given you uninterrupted time. I've asked follow-up questions based on your answers. I've tried to understand rather than ambush. If this feels unfair to you, maybe examine your definition of fairness. My definition is shaped by years of experience. Experience that you apply universally. Every journalist is the same. Every question is a trap. Every interview is an ambush. That's not wisdom. That's paranoia dressed up as pattern recognition. It's not paranoia when it's real. But is it real with me? Right now? In this specific conversation? I've been respectful. I've been curious. I've tried to connect. You've met every attempt with suspicion. The problem might not be the world, Harry. It might be how you're choosing to see it. Harry stood up abruptly. I think we're done. Tamron didn't move. Are we? Because you came here presumably to share something. Your work, your perspective, your humanity. None of that has come through. What's come through is defensiveness and condescension. Condescension? Yes. When I asked about Ukraine, you lectured me about the Budapest Memorandum as if I hadn't done my research. When I asked about Netflix, you implied I was reading biased sources. When I asked about your visa, you suggested I was doing the Heritage Foundation's work. Each response positioned you as the authority and me as the uninformed questioner. That's condescension. I wasn't trying to be condescending. Then listen to how you're coming across. I've interviewed hundreds of people. Most of them, even when they're guarded, can engage with genuine curiosity. You've treated my curiosity like an enemy to be defeated. That's not how conversations work. Harry grabbed his jacket from the chair. I'm leaving. You're walking out of an interview because you didn't like the questions. That's not a strong exit. That's confirmation of everything critics say about your inability to handle scrutiny. I can handle scrutiny. Then sit back down and handle it. I'll give you another 20 minutes. Make your case. Tell me why I'm wrong about everything I've observed. Change my mind. Harry paused at the edge of the stage. Your mind was made up before I walked in. It wasn't. I came in genuinely curious about you. What I've learned is that your curiosity is one-directional. You want people to understand you without doing any work to help them understand. That's not dialogue. That's performance. Harry didn't respond. He walked off stage, his footsteps echoing through a silent studio. Tamron sat for a moment, then turned to face the camera. I want to address what just happened, because in 6 seasons of this show, I've never experienced anything quite like it. She adjusted her position, her voice steady but carrying genuine emotion. We invited Prince Harry here to have a conversation about his life, his work, the challenges he's facing. I asked about his father being in America without scheduling time with him, not to wound him, but because it's relevant and people want to know how that feels. I asked about his Ukraine speech because it happened last week and generated controversy. I asked about Netflix because his partnerships have been in the news. Every question was tied to something public and current. She shook her head slowly. What I got back was hostility, dismissiveness, the assumption that every question was a trap. I've interviewed people in far worse circumstances, people who've lost children, who've survived abuse, who've been through things I can't imagine, and they managed to engage with me as a human being. What I witnessed today was someone so convinced of his own persecution that genuine conversation became impossible. Tamron looked directly into the camera. I wish him well, I genuinely do. But the advice I'd offer, not as a journalist, just as a person, is this. Not everyone asking questions is your enemy. Some of us actually want to understand. The walls you've built might feel protective, but they're also keeping out anyone who might actually help you tell your story. She paused. We'll be right back. The interview lasted 23 minutes before Harry walked out. Harry's team released a statement calling the interview adversarial from the start, with questions clearly designed to provoke rather than illuminate. Tamron addressed it the next day. Adversarial? I asked about his father, his work, his staff, and his wife. Those are the softest questions I could have asked. I didn't bring up the book's most controversial claims. I didn't play clips of him contradicting himself. I asked basic stuff and gave him every chance to explain his perspective. He couldn't do it. That's not my adversarial nature. That's his inability to engage with anything that isn't pure validation. The audience applauded. Look, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know the difference between a tough interview and a fair one. Yesterday was fair. He didn't like fair because fair still involves questions. And questions are apparently the one thing he can't handle. For Tamron Hall, the interview became a defining moment. Proof that her patience could be tested, but her commitment to genuine conversation couldn't be broken. She'd given Harry every opportunity. He'd thrown each one away. For Prince Harry, it was another data point in an expanding pattern. Another interviewer who didn't understand. Another platform that failed to provide unconditional acceptance. But for viewers who watched the unedited footage, the pattern told a different story, not of a persecuted prince, but of someone who'd turned every potential ally into a perceived enemy. Some interviews reveal connection. Others reveal walls, and some walls are so high that even the most patient interviewer can't see over them, let alone find a way through. Tamron had tried, Harry hadn't let her, and in the end, that said more than any answer he could have given. What do you think? Was Tamron too direct, or did Harry